So I'd like to, this is Cheryl Greengrove, and I'm on Zoom, and I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at UW Tacoma. And I want to thank Nicole Mitchell and Lauren McLaughlin from UW Press, just up the road at UW Seattle, for coming down and meeting with us and running a workshop on how to get your book published. So before we start today, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed to making the history that led to this moment. We recognize that all of us at UW Tacoma live, learn, and work on or near the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. In addition, in particular, our campus is situated on the traditional lands of the Puyallup tribe. As we gather virtually, we also want to acknowledge the lands of the Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Skokomish, Snohomish, Sammamish, and Duwamish, and all traditional lands on which we live and work, particularly now that some of us are working remotely on Zoom today. We want to acknowledge the histories of dispossession and forced removal and reflect on this history in ways that honor memory of those dispossessed and keep us committed to the cause of social justice for Indigenous populations. So thank you very much, Nicole and Lauren, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Can everybody hear me? We are thrilled to be here. I really appreciate the invitation from Cheryl to connect with UW Tacoma faculty, and we hope that this session will be helpful to you. We're going to present in a couple of parts. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background about the University of Washington Press, in case you're not familiar with our publishing house. And then Lauren is going to talk about how to get your book published and focus more on your needs and our needs, as you know, what we expect as publishers in terms of how to craft a book proposal, how to submit your manuscript, and so on. So a little background about the press. This is basically our mission. We exist to publish compelling and transformative work for regional, national, and global audiences. Scroll down again. A few facts about who we are. We happen to be the oldest and largest publisher of scholarly and general interest books located here in the Pacific Northwest, specifically based at the University in Seattle. We are one of the largest university presses in the West. There are only actually seven university presses in the West, going from California up to Alaska, and we include British Columbia as well. We are a mission-driven, non-profit book publisher, and again, based at the UW. And we're one of about 100 university presses in the US. There are about 158 globally. A little context there. Our non-profit mission is to publish books based on their value and impact rather than on profitability, although our goal is to break even or realize a surplus that is then plowed back into publishing more books. And while we are based here in the Pacific Northwest, we have distribution around the world. So our books are used and read around the world by scholars and students and general readers. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Just a little bit of history. We're actually quite old for a university press on the West Coast. We just turned 100 back in 2020. But we can trace our roots back to 1915, when we were really more of a printing house, creating publications distributing publications for the university and actually printing them. And around 1950, we separated from the printing operations at the university and started really publishing and expanding our publishing program under our own imprint, the University of Washington Press. And you can see these are some of our catalogs dating back to the 50s, and one of our recent catalogs up in the right-hand corner of the PowerPoint. So we are a medium-sized university press, and because of our size, we can't publish in every academic area. So we have to have a focused editorial program. I won't read them all, but these are our core academic subject areas. And what's nice about this list is there's a lot of synergy between these different areas, a lot of interdisciplinary work that we're able to publish across the disciplines. And in addition to that, the disciplinary focus, we also have a thematic focus. Our editors are always looking for books that address themes of social justice, race, gender, and the environment. And then because we are the only large press, university press in the Pacific Northwest, we've also had a mission to publish books about the region, about the Pacific Northwest for general readers. And we publish a huge range of books in this category. We also publish for Washington, Oregon, Alaska, Idaho, and Montana. So we claim a sort of 5-state area here. And the next couple of slides really are to give you an idea, again, of the range of publications from reference works in natural history, to gardening books, to guides, foodways, indigenous studies. One of our bestsellers, The Weather of the Pacific Northwest, which is used in classes, but also is fascinating to general readers. Other regional books tell the stories of underrepresented communities in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Seattle. There are a few examples here, again, in a strong emphasis in Indigenous studies, but also other groups. Our most recent publication, Seattle from the Margins, is one that you might want to check out. With that, I will hand over to Lauren.
Okay. Thanks, Nicole. Do you want me to advance? Yeah, it's good. Okay, try to stay on camera. So we publish, as Nicole mentioned, in a number of fields and in the region as well. This slide is about the types of books that we publish. So we do a mix of trade books and scholarly books, and they range from really specialized scholarly books that are primarily argument-driven monographs or reference texts, to books that are used in courses by students, to academic trade books, which we see as books that are kind of grounded in scholarly work, but also able to reach an audience of general readers. The regional trade that we publish is not all published by academics. We also acquire and publish books by journalists and creative writers. And the national trade are books that are about popular topics that will go beyond the region. So when editors think about our list, we are thinking about each of these categories and which category a book fits in, because they all have kind of a different needs for being developed, both in terms of the content and then their subsequent needs in terms of the marketing and the way that we will work with our marketing department to reach their audiences. What makes us a university press? So this is, every university press has books that are peer reviewed. So this is where I don't know how many, some people come to the workshops with an interest in getting their academic work published, and some people come to the workshops with an interest in getting sort of other kinds of writing published. And so in this, the rest of the presentation, we'll be talking a little bit about the various kinds of publishing you can do, just so you can help sort of think about, what is the general landscape of publishers that we live and work among. So for a university press, all of the books that we publish are peer reviewed. And so that means they're vetted by the experts in the field. This means that they are solid for tenure and promotion at lots of institutions, both within the US and around the world. Our faculty press committee approves every book we publish. Lisa is a wonderful member of our faculty press committee, and we really enjoy working with the faculty press committee and being in dialogue with them about the important things that we should be paying attention to and looking for in the books that we publish. Our books help professors secure tenure and promotion, and we are part of our mission is advancing scholarship by helping scholars communicate their new research and ideas to other scholars, to students, and then to the general public. So we're very invested in scholarly research, and this is a fundamental part of our mission. And then we also publish books that are widely adopted, especially our regional books are actually some of them are trade, but then they're also adopted in courses because they're really grounded in solid research and informative to students and others in the region. This is the broader landscape that I was referring to. So there's other types of publishers, and university presses are just one slice. The other types of publishers, you may have heard commercial academic presses. These presses publish both journals and also monographs, and others are Rowman and Littlefield, and these like the larger corporate presses, otherwise they kind of can, buy each other out, and you have to keep track of them. The slide gets a lot of, we just updated this yesterday. Who's still around, and what are they called? Independent publishers are, we've named a number, two are regional. Sasquatch Books and Timber Press are both publishers that work in this region and who we compete with for books on trade books in the region. And then the New Press is a national press, and there's a whole range of independent publishers with lots of different missions. Textbook publishers, a lot, when people hear that we work at a university press, they think textbooks. We're like, no, not really. These are kind of K-12 aimed or introductory college course books. So those are very much, these are all usually private profit-driven organizations. Large trade publishing houses, there's fewer and fewer of these as they consolidate, but you will have heard of probably both Penguin Random House and Hachette. And then, this self-publishing and hybrid options, this is kind of really a dynamic space that has changed a lot in the past 15 to 20 years. Lulu.com has been around a long time, and people have sort of, poo-pooed self-publishing, but actually a lot of people who do self-publish their books that are not actually good fits for traditional kinds of publishers are able to get their writing out in ways that are novel and interesting, and Kindle Direct use is the Amazon's variety of this. Girl Friday Productions is actually a great local hybrid publisher that also provides editorial services that we recommend people work with. They're a great team, and will sort of do things on an a la carte basis and provide a lot of support editorially and otherwise for people who are interested in publishing their works. So how many people are here because you're interested in getting a book manuscript published? And two, and then everybody, I don't know if the folks on Zoom can raise a little hand. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, super. Oh, great, okay. So choosing a publisher, it's really worth doing a research in order to effectively choose a publisher to approach. We're really looking for a fit. So knowing what publishers do will give you a good sense of whether they're likely to be interested in the work that you're working on. So our books that we publish, we call lists. A publisher has both an overall list, we call it the UW Press list, and then we also work with specific lists that are in subject areas. So editors, for example, are responsible for specific lists, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And you can research publishers' lists by looking at their websites. We highly recommend that you do that. You can also go to your bookshelf or to a bookstore and check out the new and recent titles that are coming out that are similar to your book. And that's a great way to identify publishers who are likely to be interested in your book. Mentors and colleagues may have had recent experience with presses. So talking to to mentors, talking to people who are active in the publishing world and who have published recently is really key. And editors move around. So I've been at the University of Washington Press now for 9 years. I've been here a while, but I was at 2 presses before that. And so you want to make sure that you're understanding what the current direction of a press is, because within a 5 to 10 to 15 year period, presses can significantly change their areas of focus. And so paying attention to the pub dates of the books that you see as comparable to the book that you're working on is really key, so that you'll have a sense of what's going to be most effective in terms of the current practice. Acquisitions editors, they're people like me. I have 2 other colleagues at the press. We also acquire books. We go to conferences. We really want to meet authors who are working on exciting new books. That's kind of our job. So people sometimes get a little bit intimidated about approaching editors, but we really need authors to do our work. So, so we're really thrilled to learn about new exciting projects. And so that's a major thing that we do at conferences. You can also look at different series. So series, I think of series as little little focus areas or little salons or, little initiatives. Sometimes I think of them as like signal flares, right? Of like, what is the press interested in working on that they're really prioritizing in the form of a series where you would have a like group of books that your book would be among. So knowing what's happening with new series at different presses and what series editors, scholars that you might be really inspired by or respect. Sometimes they're series editors for book series, and doing research on that area can give you a sense of where might be a good home for your book. Presses have really different production and design values. So here at the University of Washington Press, we do a lot of visual culture, we do a lot of art history, and we do a lot of gorgeous trade books. And so these kinds of books demand really excellent execution in the production area. So we're really proud of our design team and proud of of the design that we uphold, the design standards that we uphold. And so if that's something that you're looking for, then it's good to just actually look at the physical books that are coming out from a press so that you can understand like what choices they're making, what trade-offs they're making in their design decisions. Also marketing is how books find their audiences. And so, for example, if you have a book and you want it to be at a certain conference, it's really important to make sure that the press attends that conference so that it will be there. And so paying attention to how books are marketed from specific presses will give you a sense of the kind of treatment your book is likely to get. So does anybody have any questions at this point? There's a lot of different stages, and so we will go through this in roughly chronological stages. So we're happy to take questions at the end, but if there's something that comes to mind as we're going through different stages, we're happy to answer questions as we go along as well. Okay. Good? Okay. So approaching an editor, as I mentioned before, we are super excited about new projects and we want to be excited by your projects. So we want to know what's groundbreaking about a work. Why does it need to be a book? Not everything needs to be a book. So we want to know why something needs to be a book and how does it move a field forward? So if you can answer those questions about your project, you're going to be on a great first foot forward in talking to an editor. As I mentioned before, setting up meetings at conferences is a good idea. We are happy to meet with people at any stage at a conference, but what I find particularly productive is if somebody's got a proposal and they send it to me in advance, and then we actually can have a conversation that's really about the details of the proposal, if I can get, it a couple weeks in advance. So if you've got a proposal and you've got a conference coming up, month out, email the presses that you're interested in talking with, and then you can have some really grounded, substantive conversations and learn a lot about the positioning your book within a period of a couple days. Our job as acquisitions editors is to advocate for books at a press. So we want to make sure that your book, once we commit to a book, we want to make sure that everything happens that needs to for the book. So having a vision that's shared with an author and the editor and also the rest of the press is really key so that we're all on the same page about next steps, about moving forward. And so when you talk with editors, you want to determine if they get that vision that you have for your book. And if they have a different vision or if they don't seem to understand, then it might not be a great fit because you really want to be on the same page so that together you can work towards the success of your book. Acquisitions editors are the first people usually that people talk to from a press. We are the ones who establish the working relationships between the authors and the press. And so once we meet you, we know that you're going to be working with all our colleagues in all the other departments. So it's important for us to kind of have a good working relationship and be able to say, oh, this is this person's communication style. This person is really on top of things. And then we not only establish the working relationship, but we also establish the contractual relationship, which we'll talk about later as well. No, okay, Martha's agree. So acquisitions editors are all responsible for specific lists. So that means that for example, my job is the editorial director. So I am responsible for managing the editorial department, acquisitions department as a whole. But I also acquire in Native and Indigenous studies, in women's gender and sexuality studies, in visual culture and ethnic studies, and in regional trade books as well. So my colleagues, one of them acquires in anthropology and Asian studies, another acquires in Western history and environmental history and critical ethnic studies and Asian American studies. So knowing who's responsible for which lists and approaching that editor is a really good idea. So we'll pass things around, and at every press I've worked at, we pass things around if something you're like, this is not a good fit for me, but it is for you. But it's better to just figure out who the person you should be talking to is and then approach that person. And then the first place that the first, where the rubber hits the road, meets the road, is where we get a book proposal, because that's something that we can actually quite concretely act on. It gives us a lot of information about how you imagine your book to be, what you think it will look like, what you think it will do. And from reading your book proposal, we want to have as concrete a sense as possible about what this book will do and what it will look like and all of the different kinds of information about it. I think of book proposals, people, this is another area where people like approaching an editor, people can get a little bit nervous about creating the perfect book proposal. It's a working document. Basically, my biggest recommendation is that you follow the submission guidelines listed on the press's website. Basically, we come up with what we want, and if you give us what we want, then we'll be able to have a conversation and make a decision. So, and every press does the same thing. And so one of the things that, you're showing you're a good partner to a press if you go through the website and just basically, provide everything. So some of the general information that we have asked authors to cover in our proposal is quite common to presses, but I've listed it here: the scope of the project, intervention in a scholarly field, its potential market, competing books, the timeline that you're working with to write it, sample chapters. Technical details are really important. So this is how long you think it will be, the number and type of illustrations, if there's going to be permissions that are difficult in any way, or any kind of special design considerations. Like for a trade book, sometimes we have like sidebars, or there's sometimes people have special requests. So what we want to be able to evaluate is, what is this book about? Are you the right person to write it? What kind of effect is it going to have when we publish it? How many copies might we sell, and to who? And how much is it going to cost us to produce? So basically, all of this information is directed at giving us information that we take in and then can kind of think about in relationship to each other to then move forward. So and the other thing I like to say is that if you follow the submission guidelines on a press's website, like this is what we ask for. If you just write these things out, you will have a book proposal. So it's just like a recipe, right? You just have to write this part, write that part, answer these questions, and then voila. So if we have questions after we read your book proposal, like if something wasn't covered, or if we're like, sometimes I'm like, well, these chapters all make sense, but this chapter seems like a bit of an outlier. I usually go back to the person and be like, hey, I was really excited by this. I had some questions about this. Can we talk? So being a perfectionist about your book proposal isn't necessary. It's kind of it's a whole package kind of consideration. There's usually not one piece of it that you could fix that would change the whole conversation. It is just as accurately as you can represent the book that you're intending to write and that you would like to publish. A question that comes up fairly frequently is whether it's okay to submit things simultaneously to multiple presses, which we totally understand because, it can take time to go through the publishing process. And this is a really good point to bring up in your query letter or in your book proposal. Usually, our position at UW, at the University of Washington Press, is that we are happy to look at proposals at the same time that other publishers are looking at them. But once we have a manuscript that we want to send out for review, we want to be the exclusive publisher looking at it. And that's because of the resources that we invest at that time. So it's both our internal resources in terms of, we don't want to be, we can't afford to be spending time on books that we won't then have the opportunity to publish, but also our readers. You know, I don't know how many of you have read for presses, but they're quite overtaxed. And so, and we're all working with the same pools of readers. So we don't want to ask readers to evaluate manuscripts that their, you know, that their report won't necessarily be significant. So that's kind of the rationale behind it, even though it might seem difficult. So it's good to figure out, you know, have those conversations, do your research, and sort of, you know, prioritize your presses so you can figure out how to kind of move through that effectively. How many of you are revising your dissertations into a book? I don't know about the people online. So revised dissertations, we do a fair number of revised dissertations. They are largely based on pretty extensive and significant research that people conduct for their doctoral work. So they tend to be very you know, substantial in terms of what they're based on. They do have some special considerations that we think about, and they generally take a fair amount of revision to get from a dissertation form to a book form. There's a couple of books that are useful. Bill Germana's got a new book on revision. The From Dissertation to Book is a classic. It's got a lot of kind of things to think about in general terms about how to transform something that was written as a dissertation into a book manuscript. And there's some shorthands there that are useful to keep in mind. The first is audience. And one of the things that I like to share with, like, remind people of is that if you're writing a dissertation, the folks reading your dissertation, it's actually part of their job and they're paid to do that. Whereas when you're writing a book, somebody has to actually pay to read the book. So it's quite a difference in terms of what you can expect of your audience. And one of the main things about this is, for an audience of readers, you need to actually get your audience's attention, your readers' attention, hold on to it. And so you need to keep engaging them and keep your reader in mind as a reader, and craft your book in that way. And some of these other kinds of points speak to that. So for example, the literature review versus scholarly engagement. It's often an expectation that you have a literature review as a part of your dissertation project to show that you know the field. Once you're an author of a book, the expectation is that you know the field and that you're an active and engaged participant in the field, which means that actually translates to changing your paragraphs and sentences to reflect that. So rather than a list of things that people need to know and that you want to show how your ideas on a much more granular level intersect and shift understandings that are present in the field. So rather than a summary of people's arguments, you might have to choose like a piece of it and say, this evidence that I found, challenges this notion or something. So it's basically your engagement is more than a kind of synthetic summary response. Another important thing to consider is the argumentative or narrative through line of your manuscript. So many people write their dissertations in chapters that are produced at different stages of scholarly development and over different periods of time. And they might have a particular focus. They may have been a journal article at some point. You may have sort of written it for a class and then revised it. So, but for a book, every single chapter and every single paragraph in each chapter needs to drive your argument and needs to substantiate your claims and needs to be related to each other in an integrated way that progresses through the manuscript. So that is moving your reader's understanding of something from point A to point B. So thinking about your manuscript as a whole and how you're doing that overall is really important. And one of the most challenging things in writing your first book is to figure out, how do all of these parts contribute to a coherent whole that moves in a particular direction? The project scope is something that's worth thinking about as well. It's often the case that people do dissertation research and it's quite case study based or, limited geographically in particular ways. For a book, it needs to have a bigger impact. And so you need to be able to make those connections between something that's happening on the ground that's part of your research and a broader conversation. So, and this might entail additional research. So one of the things that that you want to do when you're assessing your dissertation is think about, was there another group of people that I needed to talk to? How do I need to, what other research would I need to do to develop this argument to the fullest extent that I can within this book project? And that's something that is really good to be in conversation with your colleagues and mentors about. So revised dissertations and library acquisitions and title are kind of related. And this is just a very basic point that I wanted to make, that most university presses will insist that you change your title from the title of your dissertation. And it's partly because dissertations are acquired by libraries through ProQuest. And so they tend to not want to pay twice for the same content. And so if they see that your book, when it comes out, has the same title as your dissertation, it's not going to look attractive for a library acquisition. So, and the general idea is that anything that used to be a dissertation, we already own because, we have subscriptions to dissertations in a general way. So it's really important to think about the distinctiveness of your book in relationship to your dissertation and reflect that in its title and its content overall. Are there any questions, any other questions at this point about the last couple of slides for this topic? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow. Okay. I was just interested in advance contracts, and if I don't know if the same sort of proposal stuff applies, or I was particularly curious because so many of the things that were in that very technical section, like copyright, like what are you going to do for your pictures and things like that, or like things that especially at an advanced contract stage you maybe don't have a very clear sense of.
That's a good question. We have a separate slide about contracts but like most presses, we actually do issue the same contract, essentially. That's your advanced contract versus your final contract, which means that some of those conversations that you might not be sure of about the number and type of illustrations, they actually are things that are worth working out to some extent before you sign the contract. Like, for example, there's a word count and illustration count in every advanced contract that we send out, even if they're years in advance. So in some cases it's a ballpark range, but it does really contribute to what kind of book this is. And so if those details they might not be crystal clear, there might be a little movement in them, but if they're not clear in a general sense, then the press can't know what it's acquiring, if that makes sense. So the question that you brought up about permissions, though, that's less tricky because most university presses, like most university presses, expect authors to clear all the permissions. And so we don't necessarily need to know what permissions you're going to secure at that point. It's just in an advanced contract, it will say the author is responsible for securing all the images and clearing all the permissions. So that, and the permissions question, the permissions that I brought up, it's usually not a big deal if you're reusing something like one chapter or something that's easy to secure. Where it's really important to talk about at the proposal stage is if permissions are likely going to be really expensive or difficult to secure, then that's something that's useful to flag for the editor. So for example, there's books that we've done that are reprints, they're anthologies of reprinted work. So for something like that, we know, okay, this is not going to be a big deal to get authors to revise these according to peer review, but getting the permissions from 7 different publishers who have all different kinds of forms and expectations and fees that's actually going to be the bulk of the work for this project. So knowing where the resources need to be dedicated is partly, that's what there's things that are really common that are not a big deal. And then there's some things that are kind of, we actually need to know this. And that's something that if you don't include it, or if you say, I'm not really sure what's happening, here's what I'm thinking, you'll initiate a conversation, basically. So does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I had a question about the previous slide about the book proposals. So the final line about simultaneous submissions, I think I just wasn't clear. In your case at UW Press, the thing to do would be to indicate in an inquiry letter about a simultaneous kind of policy or something. And then was it at the point when a proposal is going to reviewers or when a manuscript is going to reviewers?
This can all vary a lot by press, and in some cases it can even vary by editor or project. So there's a couple of things that I'll say to this. Like, one is, if you're sending your proposal out to a number of presses, it's actually good to say, I've sent my proposal out to a couple of other presses, and that way the publisher knows that you may well be hearing from somebody, and if they're interested, they should get back to you sooner rather than later. So it's helpful to say for that purpose in the query letter. In terms of once a publisher decides to send something out for review, whether it's the proposal for review or whether it's the full manuscript for review, it's really important to be clear on that publisher's policy for that. And so you can state your plans in your letter. So for example, I got a query recently that was like, I'm really excited about publishing my manuscript in your series. And so I'm planning to send it both to you and to UNC Press. And it's ready. And I was like, great, it's ready. Let me know what happens at UNC, basically, because we can't look at it simultaneously as another press as like when it's going out for review, because again, I don't want to overtax the readers. I don't want to, put a lot of time into offering editorial feedback for when we're not going to be able to publish the book. In this case, the person was like, I talked to my mentors, I actually want it to go to you. So I was like, great. So tell UNC that you're sending it to us. So there's just a little bit of, there's just communication that's necessary that in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because policies do differ. And so, but you can state your intentions. And if we've seen it all, right? We've seen every case. So we're not gonna be upset. We're just gonna be like, oh, this is what you want to do, either great or no, that won't work for us. So yeah, so it's just important to be transparent.
Okay. And then that's helpful. The book proposal guidelines. So I've spoken to one acquisitions editor and I've kind of taken a look at what that is for one press.
Mm-hmm.
Are those wildly different for different presses?
They tend not to be wildly different. I can tell you that SUNY's, Illinois, and UW's are not different because I helped write them all.
Okay.
So we all borrow from each other. But so you tend to have something that you can work with when you do one. I would say that it's considerate to go to each press's individual website and make sure that you're tailoring each proposal and each query letter for the press that you're working with. So showing that that you're actually reading the directions and following them and submitting what was asked for is a great way to establish a good working relationship with the press.
Okay, now I have one final question for me. I know sometimes the request is for 2 completed chapters as part of the proposal. Sometimes it's more than that. When submitting a proposal, would you want to see authors having a full working draft of the manuscript completed?
Not necessarily, no. We ask for chapters. We don't necessarily want, honestly, it's easier to assess a proposal than it is a full manuscript because the proposal is like the Cliff's Notes version of what your book will be. So we can't read every full manuscript to evaluate it. There's pros and cons of submitting proposals at different times in relationship to when you think you're going to complete the manuscript, and people make all sorts of decisions that work. But So if you are planning to finish the manuscript, the most common stage I get is somebody submits a proposal and says, my manuscript is going to be ready in 6 months to a year. That's a very common stage. It can be helpful, particularly for first books. In some cases, it just takes so much work to get where you're going to be, and you can't actually write the proposal until you know what's in every chapter, and you actually have to write the chapters before you know what's in every one. So it's often that those books are closer to completion when we get proposals. Not always the case, but it's often. Some advantages for sending a proposal when your manuscript is not finished is that you can get preliminary developmental feedback from an editor or from others if the proposal goes out for review that can change the way that you think about the manuscript for the good. So, and then, so that's worthwhile. So, but it's kind of it's a decision that like I mentioned, there's pros and cons, and there's lots of different situations that work out.
Thank you.
So here's a question just based on my own past experience. Let's say somebody's going up for tenure, and so they might be more interested in sending a few chapters and getting an advance contract. How do you like that kind of communication to go?
It's helpful for us to know as much as possible about somebody's situation along those kinds of lines. So if an author is interested in an advance contract, then I'm happy to know that, and once we have an advance contract in place, then we know, okay, there's a solid working relationship. You're not, shopping for other presses at the same time that we're talking to you. So there's some benefit to us for sure in having things under contract and ready to go. So, not all presses offer advance contracts on every kind of book. In some cases, we get a manuscript that we're like, yeah, this looks like it could be interesting. We're not 100% sure that it's going to be a slam dunk. We'd rather send it out for review before contracting. So it can go either way, and it just sort of depends on the type of book. So, but we're open to conversation. And if somebody's interested in an advance contract, I would rather know. That's helpful, so, but sometimes, just as often I'll be like, read your proposal, looks great. Are you interested in an advance contract? Because we'd love to offer you one, so.
Regarding the tenure decision, I think the advice all editors would give you is don't wait till the last minute to submit your manuscript. Publication takes time. It could go through 2 rounds of peer review and revision or more. If the tenure clock is an issue, again, be transparent with your editor, because then your editor will know what they're dealing with.
Yes, I totally, that's actually was, another point that came to mind when you said that too. And because actually in some cases, people's tenure clocks don't actually work with our publication timelines. And I would rather know that that's the case than sort of be somewhere in the middle and have somebody upset because something's not working out. So if somebody's got, going up for tenure and needs to have their book at XYZ stage, and I don't think it will happen within our process, I can be like, actually, I think you might want to go with a commercial academic press, which tend to have much faster schedules and decision-making than we do. Yeah.
And can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm actually online.
Yeah.
Cheryl, what's a typical timeline from you get the proposal, there's a couple chapters there. What's a typical ballpark timeline range? I know it varies all over the place, but let's say someone's this is their first book, they want to go up for tenure. What kind of time frame would you give them?
I love that question because I really can't answer it very effectively. I can offer best case scenario timelines that if everything goes perfectly, which tend to be unusual for first book manuscripts. So it's easier for me to answer questions like the peer review, how long does that part of the process work? Or the production process, how long does that part of the process work? So my answer tends to be along the lines of, from the time that we get a complete manuscript ready to go out for peer review, the fastest that can move forward is 18 months in terms of everything. That is like a unicorn. So, and all the time, so 18 months is not at all an average. I would say the average is more like 2 to 4 years. That it's just about all of the times that the author takes to revise, the time that peer review takes, and then the time that the production process takes. So, and there may be multiple rounds of peer review, and that is the big wild card. Because actually, if you have a manuscript that goes out for peer review, one round of peer review, that can be possible within 18 months. But as soon as you get into multiple rounds of peer review, then you're looking at least like 6 to 18 months for revising an additional peer review. So that's the thing that like knocks it into the next stage of length, which is more common for people, you know, where people haven't written a book before.
Thank you.
I was wondering how, for editing collections, any of this changes, or I mean, especially with proposals, it seems like submitting 2 chapters might be very different than like what else is coming at you, you know, with the rest of the book.
You know, actually, submitting 2 chapters for an edited collection is fine. It's useful to know the range of the types of chapters. So, if the edited collection has different kinds of chapters, like an artist interview or academic essays or other kinds of pieces, then you would want to see examples of the full range of what would be included. The edited volumes, you know, one of the big things within a proposal for those that's really important is the list of contributors. That's the main thing that we're going to be looking at in addition to the scope and impact of the books, knowing who's going to be in it. I don't know. Can you think of anything?
The timeline for edited manuscripts.
Oh yeah, the timeline is tricky because you're herding cats. So, and usually, you know, the one essay that you feel like you can't afford to drop is the one that's always the latest. And that can hold things up for a year. So timeline, it's really good to be as generous as possible as you can be with your timeline, or as accurate, and to kind of let all the contributors know what that timeline is and how firm it is. Because you do get into these situations where the manuscript is held up because one person doesn't send their essay in. And then you've got a lot of like, you know, other scholars who are junior who need the publication for their CV for various professional reasons. So there ends up being a lot of internal tension in the timelines of edited manuscripts. And I think they're pretty uniformly more work than people think that they signed up to do. Yeah.
Some presses actually don't publish edited collections. Part of the reason for that is, as a general rule, but there are many exceptions, is that they tend to perform less well in the market. In other words, sell fewer copies than single-authored works. Again, there are lots of exceptions. So your editor is going to evaluate a proposal for an edited collection in a very different way from a single-authored work, and I will let you.
Yes. In addition to often not performing as well, there often are a lot more work for various reasons at every stage. So for us, it's just like a bigger step to take. So, so when we acquire edited volumes, we're looking for something that is truly groundbreaking. So is material that's so new and compelling that people haven't had the chance to write full monographs about it yet. So you're just, you know, so that's going to be a go-to book because it's really the only thing out there in a particular area in the field, and it's kind of setting the fields, some subfields or some, you know, agenda there. The other piece that we look for in an edited volume is how well it would be used, how adoptable it is, basically. We want to know that it's going to be used in courses and a resource for people. Otherwise, if it's not one of those two things, there's no reason to acquire it in general. Oh, okay, so peer review. So peer review, many of you, I'm sure, you probably all have had experience with peer review in one way or another. So some of this is going to be well-trodden material. But one thing that I love peer review, and I think most university press editors do. We find it for me, it's just like incredible to be like a witness to some of the most generous and generative feedback and transformation in scholarship that's just completely not seen by anybody else. You know, we're witness to this, like, you know, the ways that things change in beautiful and amazing ways through this process. So, and I started off with that just to make the point that this is both, we see this both as it's known as a gatekeeping function, but it's also incredibly developmental. And so, and it's where really wonderful work takes place. So I tend to, like, people often think of peer review as really difficult in various ways. It's hard to get feedback. It's hard to leverage feedback to make your manuscript stronger, especially when it's not presented always in the you know, it's in your ideal way. So thinking about, we'll talk about this in the next slide. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So, but generally, you know, as we know, peer review is meant to validate the scholarship that is coming out from a particular publisher. It needs to show what the originality and impact on a field is. You need to make sure that the documentation is and sources are according to the conventions of the areas that you're working. The style, coherence, development, effectiveness of the argument is all assessed, and we look to peer review to make sure that it's going to work for the audience that we would anticipate for the book. So we're choosing people from its target audiences as peer reviewers largely, the purpose is also to provide feedback to help shape and improve it, and to make sure that it does what it needs to do. So for example, we do a lot of work in interdisciplinary areas, and so people are often very ambitious in terms of the disciplines that they want to reach. So we will often select peer reviewers from those respective disciplines. And in some cases that works out. In other cases, there's a disciplinary friction there that the author can actually either choose to resolve or not, but work with to actually then meet the needs of the audience that we're actually getting somebody from that field to give specific feedback focused along those lines. So the purpose of peer review and the experience of peer review there's often kind of a disjuncture between them. Peer review can be challenging for authors to navigate. We have a little comic here, it's often the case that receiving peer reviews for a full manuscript are the first time that some scholars have gotten that kind of extended, engaged, critical feedback on their work in a way that just kind of can be a little bit disorienting for people. And I encourage people to read the report and then set it aside, take some breaths, go for a walk, read it again. If you need to set it aside again, do some more work. It's difficult to engage in some cases. Most presses use a single blind process, and we send the manuscripts to 2 readers. We often do send them to more readers for one reason or another, either through an additional round of review. But this is the basics of what we do. The single blind process is different from journals, and it's partly because of the greater investment of time that it takes readers to read a full manuscript versus an article. They want to know who the author is, but authors, but they'll be anonymous to the authors. Getting peer reviews has been challenging during the pandemic. It's been a little bit better, but people are overtaxed, as you can imagine. We request reviews to come in 6 to 8 weeks, in some cases less, but in general, the process usually takes at least 2 to 3 months. Readers are often late. We like to hear author suggestions for readers. Even if we don't use those specific suggestions, it's useful to know who is the imagined audience of the authors. As I mentioned before, peer reviews can be challenging, but they're worth engaging to strengthen your manuscript. What I've seen some really challenging reviews, I've seen authors take them and leverage them to include to improve their manuscripts really substantially. So, and this is about the work of figuring out how to use these peer reviews as a tool to make for a stronger manuscript. One of the things that is often worth sharing is that peer review is a chance to receive feedback on your full manuscript before it's out in the world. And so if you think about, what happens when there's published reviews of the book, people say all sorts of things. And so it's often nice to get that feedback in advance, so you still have a chance to adjust your manuscript so it doesn't sort of push those buttons or provoke that particular critical feedback. So it is really an opportunity to strengthen and to know the specific concerns that people will have. Peer reviewers aren't the be all and end all in terms of their expectations and what they ask for. I mean, it is really important to engage them seriously, but in some cases, they'll identify a problem, but offer a solution that's not maybe what you want to do. So in that case, it's useful. We always give authors the opportunity to write a letter of response when the project is moving forward. And in that case, they might say, I hear what this reader B said about X, but I don't like their solution. I'm going to do this instead. Or I think that this piece of feedback doesn't feel appropriate for X, Y, and Z reason. So there is a chance to actually articulate your perspective. It's best to do so in as non-defensive a way as possible. So I often will get a letter of response and be like, hear what you're saying. You need to rewrite this. It's not going to go well. So because it is about showing engagement and showing that you're really actually, this is like how you're representing how you're part of a scholarly conversation. Yes.
I just want to add that, so on the faculty review committee at presses, that's what we get, is that conversation between the peer reviewer and the author. And so I think, Lauren's point that kind of a defensive response from the author, it doesn't kind of show that engagement that you would expect and kind of desire to move the project forward.
Thanks, Lisa. Yes. So, and you might wonder how many we have. How many we asked them to rewrite? It's only maybe half. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, Nicole just pointed out we're a little bit over time, so I'll just we'll keep. I think we've gone over this, the rest of this information. Yeah, next slide. Okay, and this is the Faculty Press Committee we talked about. Our other representative from Tacoma is Emily Thuma. We're really pleased to have joined us this year, first time. We talked a little bit about negotiating contracts earlier, but if you have questions about these things, I'm happy to answer them. Nicole is too, she does a lot of contracts, we do them together. These are just some fun slides from conferences this fall, actually, where people were very excited to be in our booths with their books and celebrate together and be out in the world. And we are really excited to see everybody's joyful responses and reactions to the books that they're seeing that we publish. I think that's it. So, are there more questions? If we have, I don't know if we have time. If the room's,
I don't know. We're about time, Cheryl. Oh, is there a question there from Ed?
Yeah, I think Ed's just given the thumbs up. So thank you very much. I'm clapping. Thank you. And we are a little over time, so my apologies. Some people probably had to leave because we have class starting at 1:30 on campus. This is our lunch hour. So just so you know, they probably had to run off to class, some of them. I had a question I was thinking about as you were doing this. How, like, yeah, I was just looking at some of the books, particularly the Pacific Northwest theme books. Like, for instance, I've read and worked with David Williams a lot, particularly on his last book. He and I chatted about that extensively. How do you decide, like, if, should he go to Sasquatch or Timberline or the local guys versus you? What does UW Press provide? Obviously, you provide a more scholarly peer review, right? But how do you decide, like if someone, like David Williams comes to you and says, I want to publish my book with you, how do you decide if it should be you or one of those other presses? Like, how do you make that decision?
So I'm taking this question because I worked with David on his latest book with us, Home Waters, which was a natural history of Puget Sound, for those who are not familiar with the book. I mean, ultimately, the choice is the author's, but our selling points is that, as Lauren has very eloquently explained, that peer review really does help strengthen books for publication from an originality and an accuracy point of view. In David's case, we went to several different kinds of peer reviewers to make sure that all aspects of his book were covered, that he was, even though he's not a scholar himself, that he was engaging in the latest scholarship. So again, preempting, possibly negative publisher reviews, prior to publication. So we really feel that process, even for more popular books, really helps to strengthen works for publication.
That's great.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful book, and I love his books, right? And he's a geologist by training, but not necessarily the other areas. So that was great. Thank you.
The other thing I'd add to that is in the region, we are really well known and respected and have a wonderful and sizable footprint in the regional book market. And so we've found that some authors that we've had worked with on their first books have then use those books as like a launching pad to go to big New York trade houses, and have actually then come back to us for their third books because of the kind of treatment they get at the press, and because of the way we understand the regional market better than some of the bigger trade presses on the West Coast. I know you're talking about the regional presses, but it's actually been really remarkable and rewarding to have that happen.
Thank you. Are there any other last minute questions before we stop recording? And I think, Kelly, I think you have the ability to stop recording when we're done here. Any other last minute questions in the room or online? I don't see any questions online. Anybody left in the room, or did they all run off to class?
No one's moved.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming today. And for those of you, we have some people scheduled. Oh, we got a question from Mike Honey in the chat. How do you decide the price of a book? That's very interesting.
That's a good question. Largely, we are looking at the market and the comparables for the book. And then, we look at the financials involved as well. So, we need to make sure that something that costs us like $200,000 to produce is not something that we're going to sell for $18.95. So, yeah. So it's a relationship between these two factors.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, as Lauren said, generally we're pricing appropriately for the market. One of the things I will add is that because we are non-profit, mission-driven, and we do receive a very small subsidy from the University of Washington, we are very conscious of keeping our books priced as accessibly as possible, because we are part of the scholarly ecosystem, and we're well aware of that, how pricing affects what students are able to purchase.
Any other last minute questions? And then I think we're going to wrap up. Okay, I want to thank you for coming today. Please thank our speakers. Thank you so much for making the trip to Tacoma.
Thank you so much for having us.